Hello, this is Devlog number 6 in my series of releasing something before Christmas. In this devlog I will be adding various animations such as idle animations and attack and death animations, as well as adding a hotbar and also weapons so that you can cycle through these on your hotbar, and also interactions with the environment such as wood chopping, which I begin to touch on. So first I created the new attack animation for the fox, and then a new idle animation was added. And then finally I added a new death animation for the fox. I also added idle animations and death animations to the sheep. Obviously they don't have an attack animation. So the biggest change in this animation refactor was actually the creation of a custom animation controller, which moved away from the default Unity animation state manager, and it just cleared it up so that there was no hard-coded relationships. And now all transitions are handled in code. In my last video, I mentioned I was importing models from a 3D low poly pack, which was free to use. However, I noticed that there was a massive 98% sale on all of these packs, as well as various other random ones. And so I went ahead and bought this bundle, and this is hopefully going to take care of a lot of the asset needs I have for the foreseeable. So my next mission was to build up the HUD a wee bit more, so I went ahead and built a hotbar section, and I'm just trying to add a frame here, which I'm taking from my other project. So it took me quite a while, but I finally got this border image working, and now we have a clean hotbar container, and we're ready to populate it with various items. So also taken from my other project was this selectable item prefab. And so this is what's going to be used to populate the hotbar, and it's got selected behaviour baked in the form of a bright yellow border. And so when you cycle between items on the hotbar, it will be obvious to the user what they have selected. Next, I needed to dynamically render these selectable boxes as children inside the hotbar. And so I took a flexibileGrid component from my other project, which I had previously made, which basically takes the number of children and it will put it in a grid. So in this case, it will be a 1-row grid, and this will evenly space them out. So you can see here the grid being applied, and it will automatically place those children. So you can see here all the child components are floating to the left. So I gave the AI my code and asked them to add a checkbox to the Unity component, which would apply automatic padding in order to evenly space them out in the hotbar. And here it is in effect. And here's how it looks in game. Obviously I still need to populate these selectable items. Next I wanted to hook up the highlighting capabilities, so I asked the AI to produce a script which would accept the keys 0 to 9 and then map these up to highlighting the right selectable item. And so here they are working. Obviously it doesn't do anything yet, but the UI is all hooked up. And I added a placeholder sword icon and then a default placeholder icon for an empty slot. So there was still no concept of a weapon in the game, and so I added the weapon blueprint class along with the weapon blueprint library, and this would allow any object to query any weapon type and fetch the stats. And then the actual item class can be reserved for actual instances of an item. and then I added an actual weapon slot to the character prefab, and this would allow the model to render the weapons model on the player. And so when you cycle through your hotbar, we can now manipulate what the player is holding. And then I introduced the axe and pulled it out of one of the asset packs, brought it into the game, and then tried to render this in the character's hand. And so here's the new axe model loaded into the game. And as you can see, it behaves exactly like the sword. And the behaviour I'm going to give this axe is the ability to be able to cut down that tree. And so when the tree gets hit and the player's holding an axe, I want to remove the tree and render a stump. And for now, that will be enough. Picking up the wood and growing the tree again, etc. can come at a later date. And so I've added a chop down method on the tree class, which will get executed when the game detects a hit from the player on a tree and the player is holding an axe. So here you can see that logic in action. When you hit the tree with a sword, the chop down method doesn't get invoked on the tree object. However, when I change to an axe, it will check the weapon name and chop it down accordingly. So as part of the work I mentioned earlier involving the weapons blueprint library, I had abstracted weapon configurations to a JSON file, and I'm just adding a property called chops, which will dictate whether the item can chop down a tree, and this is just better than maintaining a list of every item by name that chops a tree. So here you can see I'm changing the logic from the name comparison against the hard-coded axe string value, and instead I'm just referencing the boolean chops property of the weapons object. This makes it a lot cleaner and a lot more maintainable. And here it is running again with the new code. There's no changes. And that's all I've got in this devlog. In my next devlog, I will be tackling the ability to farm the wood from the trees and pick it up, and therefore implementing an inventory system, as well as approaching the entire game loop to actually make a somewhat playable game, as we're approaching Christmas and I need to get a beta build out in time. Thanks for watching.